Hi everybody, I'm Steve Manser, and this is part 3 of our tutorial series on air roller rental agreements. In this tutorial, we'll look at how to renew and amend rental agreements. We're going to start by amending a rental agreement. And I'm not going to actually make any changes to the rental agreement. I'm just going to use this example to kind of show you what happens when you amend a rental agreement. We'll use Pablo's rental agreement here. And the first thing that we'll do is go have a look at Pablo's payer statement. Now, Roller has rental agreement statements, which are just focused on the rental agreement, and payer statements, which are focused on everything that a particular payer owes. And if a payer is responsible for multiple rental agreements, then all of those rental agreements will show up on the payer statement. Okay, so let's open up Pablo's payer statement. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time going over this whole statement. The thing to notice here is there is currently only one rental agreement that Pablo is responsible for, and that the total amount he's been assessed is $1,010. That's pretty much all we need to look at this point. Okay, so now let's go back to the rental agreements. Bring up his rental agreement. Okay, let's edit this. There's no existing reference number version of it, so no one else is making any changes. We hit the edit button and start a new one. Now let's take a look at the dates here. The start date is set to today, and the end date has not changed from the original agreement. We could have set the start date to November 1st because for this company, rent becomes due on the 1st. But for this exercise, let's just assume that we had to make this change today and that it has to go into effect today. So we'll just click Get Approvals, and I will walk it through the approval sequence. First approval made, second approval made. Set the date for execution to today. Update. And now let's execute this change. Okay, so now we have rental agreement 6. And also notice that there are 2 rental agreements with Pablo's name next to it. One that ends on October 18th and the next one that begins on October 19th. And this one, of course, would be the rental agreement that we just created. And as I mentioned earlier, all renewed and amended rental agreements are linked internally. But on the interface here, we can work with them as though they were separate and individual rental agreements. So now let's go back and have another look at Pablo's payer statement, having just made this amendment. And as you can see, there are now 2 rental agreements. The original one plus the amended one that we just created. So let's walk through and understand a little closer what's happened here. The first thing to point out is that there were 2 rent assessments that were due on the 1st of October. Both of those have been reversed. And they've been replaced with 2 prorated rental assessments for rental agreement 1 and 2 other prorated rental assessments for rental agreement 6. And it's done that because by making this amendment, we've essentially terminated rental agreement 1 on October 18th, and we've started up a new one, rental agreement 6, on the 19th. We want the assessments to be the correct amounts and associated with the correct rental agreements. Now, if we would have made the amended rental agreement start on November 1st, we wouldn't have had these prorated amounts. But I wanted to show you that if you did need to make a change like this mid-cycle, you can not only do it, but Roller will help you with the details. Now remember, when we made this amendment, we didn't change any of the assessment amounts. So when we add all of this up, there should be a net 0 change to the amount owed. So we'll take a look here. So 586.46 423.54 totals to $1,010. Good, that's what we expect. Now here's another detail I wanted to show you before we go any further. If you edit a rental agreement by accident, in other words, you hit the edit button by accident, or you hit it and you thought you were going to make a change and ultimately you decide not to make a change, and so now there's this reference number version that you see every time you go to the list here, and we don't want people thinking there's a change in the works when there's really not one. So what can we do to get rid of it? Well, if you go back and edit the rental agreement again, there's this button here with a little trash can on it. That's the delete button. You can just hit the delete button and it will get rid of a reference number version. So there we go, it's gone. Now you'll want to be careful with this one. You want to make sure you don't delete someone else's work, but the delete function is there if you need it. And you may have guessed this, but you can't delete any rental agreement that's been made active. Those rental agreements are kept even after they've been terminated. All right, now let's actually make a change. Let's go to Floria Dean's rental agreement here, and let's assume that we want to change Floria's rent. And in this case, let's just assume that we want this change to happen as of November 1st. We'll actually do this two different ways. The first way here, with the rent starting on the 1st, there's not going to be any prorated payments, so that one should work out nice and clean. And then for our next one, we'll make the rent change mid-cycle, so we'll have those prorated payments. So we'll save this. And then go to the rentables, and there's the $1,500 rent payment. Let's edit that, and we'll change that. Let's just make it $1,600. Save that change. Click there. Now let's go through the approval cycle. Again, we'll walk it through quickly here. Approve, approve. This as of the 1st of November. And then execute that change. Okay. Let's see what my date range here is. We're looking at the month of November. Let's go back and take a look at October. And let's go take a look at Floria's pair statement for October. And as you can see here, there are no changes. There's her $1,500 rent and her $10 pet fee, so no changes there. Now if we go to the assessments, again, we won't see any changes in October. There were no changes that we made that affect October. But if we go to November, you can see here that there are now two new assessments for Rentable 4, recurring definitions, one for the $1,600 rent and the other for the pet fee. That didn't change. And look here at the notes, the comment that it says this was derived from Rate 4 Assessment 21. So it's just giving you kind of a history of how this thing came about. Assessment 21 will be the recurring rent assessment in the previous rental agreement. That would be the one associated with Rentable 4. And similarly, you can see that the pet rent was derived from Rate 4 Assessment 23. Roller puts comments like this into many of the assessments that it generates on its own. Now this was a fairly simple amendment, and the comments may seem to point out the obvious, but there are some edge cases that we'll examine in a future tutorial where these comments are invaluable. Okay, now we're going to go back and redo that amendment. And instead of starting it on November 1st, we're going to go ahead and start it on today. Okay, so we edit the rental agreement and then edit a RefNo version of it. And you can see that the dates are now 10/19 for the start dates. So we open the rentables, bring up the rent and notice that we've got a prorated payment as well as the recurring $1,500 a month payment. So we have two changes to make here. First thing, let's go in and change this to our $1,600. And now we need to change that prorated amount because it's no longer prorating $1,500 a month. It has to prorate $1,600 a month. And you can see down here that it's telling you it's for 13 out of 31 days. So that takes care of some of the work for us. So we just take the 13 divided by 31 times the new rent amount, 1,600. That gives us 670.97. Okay, now we'll just save that. And next, we're just going to walk it through the approval process again. I will quickly blast through this. Approve. Second approval. We'll do that as of today. And execute. So first, let's go back into October and take a look at what happened here. It's going to be easier to do this in the payer statement. That way we won't see all the unrelated assessments. Okay, so we can see here that we've reversed the full month rent payment and the full month pet rent payment. And we've added prorated amounts. And for the rent payment, it's prorated on that $1,500 a month. Then for our new amended rental agreement 7, we've got a rent payment that is prorated based on the $1,600 a month for 13 days. Okay, to verify that everything is in place for the newly amended rental agreement, we can't actually use the payer statements because since November hasn't arrived yet, the assessments haven't been made. They haven't come due yet. But we can go back to the assessments view and just take a look at the recurring assessment definition, which should be created here on November 1st for $1,600 for rentable 4. There it is, and we can see the note that was added here and the pet rent down below it. So assessment 53 here is the new recurring rent assessment of $1,600, and you can see that it was derived from RAID 4, Rental Agreement 4, Assessment ID 21. And you can see here that the stop date has been changed on this recurring assessment. It used to go into 2020, and now it's been stopped as of today. So in this case, in addition to stopping the old rental agreement and starting the new rental agreement, we've also stopped 2 rent assessments, the old apartment rent assessment and pet rent assessment, and replaced them with 2 new rental assessments, and both of those are being charged to the new rental agreement. Now, let's go through renewing a lease. I know this one terminates in 2020, but let's just do it anyway. Now, as we're doing this, I want to point out how Roller handles things based on the date that you give it to make an amendment or a renewal. A renewal is just an amendment of sorts. So we haven't made any date changes yet, and it's the 21st of October, and we can see that, if we're going to make this change now, there's going to have to be a prorated payment for the rest of this month, as well as a new recurring payment starting next month. And it's going to look the same for the rentables here. There's going to be a recurring assessment for the rest of this month and another recurring assessment starting up next month. Now, when we talk about extending something, we're going to go past its current end date to basically the next day. And so that'll be in March 1st, 2020. And in this case, let's make it go for a year. So that'll be 2/28/2021. And all the dates are going to be the same here. So let's just use the copy function to take care of that. Save those dates. Now let's go have a quick look at the result of that on the payments. You can see now that we don't have a prorated assessment any longer. There's no need since it starts on the epic date. That is the day that rent is due. And we can go have a look now at the rentables. It'll be the same thing there. Again, we just have the one rent assessment. Now, if there are other fees that also need to be added here in this renewal, you can always hit the Add New button and add whatever fees you need to add. So in this example, it's pretty likely, this was a 2-year lease, I think, so it's probably, you would probably raise the rent, and we can do that right here. We'll just raise it $100. Okay, we can save that, and now we see the rent has gone up to $1,100 a month. And again, for this example, let's just assume that was the only change that we needed to make. So at this point, we would just go through the get approvals process again. We'll just blast through that very quickly. Approve that one, and then second approval, approve. The date, I think, 3/1/2020. Update. And now execute this change. And now the new rental agreement becomes active. Now my date range was set to end a couple of years from now, and yours probably wouldn't have been set up like that. It probably would just be the present month, so obviously you would need to change that date range in order to see the extended rental agreement that we just created. So I'll do that now. And there it is. So it is an active rental agreement. But remember that the only thing that we can see now is just the recurring assessment. There won't be any instances until March 1st, 2020 comes around. For now, we can take a look at the recurring assessment definition and make sure that it's there. So there's our $1,100 rent assessment and the pet rent assessment, and they're all set to go starting on March 1st, 2020. Okay, so there we have it. We have updated and amended rental agreements. A couple of other points I want to mention here. In the examples that we looked at here, we only changed the assessment amounts. Now, this is probably going to be a fairly common change that you'll make, but any change that's made to the rental agreement data will require you to go through that rental agreement approval flow. So that means even things like if you went in and changed an attribute of a transactant, either a payer or a user or whatever, changing something as simple as their name, or if you change your pet's weight, or if you add another vehicle, or delete a vehicle and add another one in its place. All of these things will require that you go through the rental agreement approval cycle in order to make the amendment active. Okay, everybody, that is all for this tutorial. As always, leave me questions, comments, suggestions below, and I will do my best to accommodate.